I can see the future. I have just unlocked the ultimate fantasy of every Warhammer player. I control Games Workshop. All I have to do is build a stupidly massive diorama, and Games Workshop brings out a brand new Middle-earth box set themed to that location. I built the Pelennor Fields box set. I build Osgiliath box set. I build Edoras, brand spanking new Edoras box set. Now I know what you're saying in the comments, Lockie, this is just a coincidence. You build megaboards of the most famous locations in Middle-earth. These are the obvious choices for Games Workshop to theme their box sets around. And you know what I have to say to that? Nuh-uh. So Games Workshop's brand new box set is themed around the Siege of Edoras. Now that's especially spooky for me because my first 3 videos on this channel were Osgiliath, Edoras, and the Pelennor Fields. And with Edoras completing the trifecta, that is now the last 3 box sets that we have had for the Middle-earth strategy battle game. Now I cannot resist getting swept up into building an absolutely massive Edoras mega layout to celebrate the launch of the new box. And I have actually built Edoras 3 times before. So with the launch of the brand new edition of Lord of the Rings Warhammer, today we're going to look back across the first 3 incarnations of my Edoras build and make a start on the new Zorpazorp Edoras mega build, the latest chapter in the biggest wargaming board in YouTube history.
Last fortnight, Games Workshop sent me a mountain of plastic crack, 170 sprues of Rohan scenery, and we dived into plastic bashing a whole heap of buildings to build up our arsenal of Rohan structures. And last week, we began work on the inner court using Weta Workshop's new Edoras collectible to give us an insanely screen-accurate platform for the centerpiece of this monster Edoras layout. But the city of Edoras is so much more than just a cluster of thatch huts and spiky walls, and how we join the lower city and outer walls to the rocky hilltop of Meduseld is going to be a very tricky task. So let's get a handle on the full scope of this monster Edoras superboard. I see a white stream that comes down from the snows. Where it issues from the shadow of the vale, a green hill rises upon the east. A dike and mighty wall and thorny fence encircle it. Within there rise the roofs of houses, and in the midst, set upon a green terrace, there stands aloft a great hall of men, and it seems to my eyes that it is thatched with gold. I've discovered this amazing game that's available on both mobile and PC. Thanks to Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video, and special thanks to Universal Studios licensing. An endless amount of content, incredible champions ranging from lizard-like creatures to elves, orcs, dwarves, each one looking exceptionally cool. Raid Shadow Legends is partnering with Universal Products and Experiences and Mattel to bring He-Man and Skeletor to the game as legendary champions, so you can live out your nostalgic childhood fantasies. Starting from November 25th to December 25th, you can get your hands on both champions, including one for free via a 14-day loyalty program. This is just so nostalgic for me. He-Man is a truly mighty warrior, enhancing his own attack before destroying any evil that stands before him, and Skeletor is a nefarious trickster, extending debuffs, sealing his enemies in stone, and reducing their turn meter. Everyone can get legendary champion Skeletor for free simply by logging into Raid on 14 days between November 25th and January 8th. You'll get Skeletor on day 7 and extra bonus rewards for the next 7 days after that. You'll need to start by December 25th to make sure you've got enough time to log in each day and get Skeletor and all the goodies. Players can also complete the Champion Pass to get the legendary champion He-Man. So if you haven't started playing yet, what are you waiting for? Click my link in the description or scan my QR code to get insane bonuses available only via my link. On sign up, you'll immediately get a huge starter pack with an epic champion Tagoar. From level 15, another starter pack with an epic champion Uugo. And after downloading with my link, use promo code Monkey King to get a legendary champion son Wukong for free. Come find me under the name Zorpazorp, join my clan the Zorptrons, and I'll see you in the game. We begin, as we often do, with the union of Tolkien and Jackson. Tolkien provides an incredible level of description of the city of Edoras, well beyond that initial quote from Legolas. The palisade wall, the horsehead carvings adorning the buildings, the golden filigree inlaid in Meduseld's timber supports, the hue of the flagstones, the murals on the walls, and every single one of these details was adhered to in exactitude by Peter Jackson, Grant Major, and Dan Henner. I actually had the privilege of working under Dan Henner when I was still in the film industry, showing him my Edoras boards and chatting to him about the madness of building the set over 20 years ago remains the absolute highlight of my film career. Dan, if you're watching, I hope that you and Chris are doing well. The films by Peter Jackson and the incredible design work done by Alan Lee and John Howe thus became the foundations for the designs for my wargaming scenery. I poured over every frame of the films as well as on-set photographs, behind-the-scene footage, and the incredible sketches and artwork by Alan. I began my first Edoras build in 2018. In fact, the second and third videos ever on this channel covered that build, and then I built it again in 2019. These two boards are essentially the same style, blending a huge amount of scratch building and classic scenery crafting. The second is just, yeah, you guessed it, bigger. So we're gonna examine them both together, and we can break up the builds into some distinct phases: landscaping and contouring, hard structures, scatter terrain, painting, and ground covers. In both of these boards, the gatehouse was a huge focal point, and shaping the board itself to feel like a realistic representation of the sloping hillsides of Edoras whilst maintaining a playable surface was an important consideration. I opted for a gradual slope that I carved and sanded into the hillside leading up to the gatehouse, and then kept the region inside the walls relatively flat, apart from some rocky escarpments. The landscaping process is simple: just cut away large blocks of foam with the blade, sanding wherever necessary, and then smoothing out the whole landform by applying modeling compound. As I sculpted the landforms, I began to bring in the foundations of the palisade walls. These are simply sections of extruded polystyrene that are cut to wind their way down the hillside. On both builds, I opted to have these fully built into the board for that really high level of scenic realism. This means that I can sculpt landforming right up to the rock face and blend them in with filler and eventually grass and flocks, which makes the palisade feel really seated within the environment. Once I was happy with the layout, I began to work on the hard structures, starting with the upper palisades, the gatehouse, and the towers. These all have foundations of extruded polystyrene with a brickwork pattern that is simply carved in with a pen, and then the structures themselves are a combination of balsa wood, modeling timbers, and coffee stirrers of different widths and thicknesses. As a general rule, I started with the larger beams to build the core structure, and then added paneling with timber planks so that it looked as realistic as possible. I also used my rotary tool to score and chip away at the larger beams as I assembled them to create a nice weathered and beaten look. These structures have been sitting out in the elements for over 500 years by the time of the War of the Ring, and they should look suitably aged. With the first 3 towers done, I moved on to the upper palisade, just a whole lot of dowel rod of varying diameters getting carved to a point and set at different heights. Each section of spikes is held together by horizontal beams, and then the spike at either end is longer at the base and mounted directly into the foam foundation. With the walls complete, the only defensive structure left was the gatehouse itself, which was made in the same way as the main towers, but I used some railroad roofing tiles to get that perfect shingle look for the centerpiece, and I kept all the towers fully removable as well, just to make it easier for storage and transport. The final part of the detailing was to add some plaster rock molds and shape the rocky escarpments at the rear of the board, and then the game board is done for now, and we need to work on all of our scatter terrain. When I built Edoras the first time around, some of the buildings were way too large, so in the second iteration, I designed a set of pieces of varying sizes to allow for a lot more different configurations behind the walls. They all had to be fully enterable for maximum gameplay, really convey the feelings of village life without cluttering the board. First, the main shape for each building is knocked up out of foam core board, including any doors or entrances, and then this substructure gets clad in timber, either in sheets of balsa carved with a pattern or with individual planks. The roofing structure is made in the same way, with large wooden braces added to the ends of the roof lines, often carved with horse heads and various details, and then higher density modeling timber for these parts for added strength. The thatch is then made from teddy bear fur from the fabric store that is sealed and diluted with PVA glue. The best way to get a varied looking city is to create a real range of buildings. I went for several smaller dwellings, a large mead hall, a stable, and several sheds, workshops, crops, and fences. Then it's time for painting. I gave the ground texture some base toning with light browns and greens and a final bone highlight, and then it's onto our wooden buildings. Now the key here is, once again, we want these to look old. The buildings should be weathered and sun bleached, so nothing can be too clean. Just using cheap craft paints, I built up a series of dry brush layers of different browns and some some yellow ochre, and then a bone to finish, and then a really heavy wash of brown and green inks to nicely blend and weather that timber, and one final dry brush of white bone to give it that sun-kissed sparkle. With everything painted, our final phase is the best of all, the flocks and the ground covers. Across these two boards, I use two different styles. My first one is a much more kind of yellow prairie grass look, and then the second more of a summer green. For the Rohan aesthetic, I actually prefer the first board, but regardless of the overall process, it's the same, we just change the tones of the static grass, and I think when I rebuild Edoras for board number 3, we're gonna go back to those lovely yellow tones of the first board. First goes down the grass tufts, mostly 6mm along the edges of paths, next to buildings, and kind of dotted sporadically through the hills and the plains, and then we start building individual grass fibers, layering in 2mm grass to cover the entire surface, building up a solid coverage, worked straight into a layer of PVA, and then I put down spray adhesive and layered on more passes of 4 and 6mm grass to create some lovely variation of height, particularly around the front of the walls. The trick with realistic looking grass is to break up any uniformity with different grass blends, so different colors, different lengths, everything from the same kind of color family that's a different tone, and that creates lovely natural variation. So there we have my first 2 attempts to bring Edoras to life, and if you want to see these boards get some game time, I've actually just uploaded a battle report over on my gaming channel, Zorp of the Rings. My third attempt at Edoras took a completely different direction, inspired heavily by Games Workshop's release of the War in Rohan supplement in February of 2020, as that heralded the arrival of a whole suite of plastic Rohan scenery kits, and these glorious kits got me fired up. I spent several weeks kit bashing unique structures, combining wall sections and roofing pieces to get a bunch of unique buildings to begin building a new Rohan landscape, a range of smaller house-sized buildings and a big centerpiece, combining 3 or 4 kits together to make a double-storied monster. Now sadly, this board never got any further, but in 2022, just before the big move to New Zealand, I decided to try and kickstart the project once more with a very special trip to Middle-earth.
As we build Edoras on Edoras.
Rohan will answer.
Now, you guys know I love a good trek out to Mount Sunday, the filming location for Edoras, and in November of 2022, my mate Bo and I decided to do some on-location crafting to build Middle-earth in Middle-earth. Here, down at the base of the slopes of Mount Sunday, we have the site of the gatehouse and the outer wall. Now, this section was only about 100 meters wide when it was built, just large enough to shoot all of the close scenes around the gatehouse, and the rest was extended digitally for all the gorgeous sweeping wide shots. So I decided while we were out on this glorious location to build a small diorama of just the gatehouse, but as we were about to move to New Zealand and have to leave behind all of my big boards probably for many years, I decided to salvage the original gatehouse from the very first Edoras board that we just saw getting built and rebuild it on location at Edoras.
If you guys are getting hyped for the new edition of Lord of the Rings Warhammer, make sure you use my affiliate links down in the description. I've hunted out the best prices no matter where you are in the world or what Warhammer you're buying. So use those links down below. It sends a little kickback to support everything we're doing here on the channel, which is just so insanely helpful.
Oh, this is touch and go. And the leap of faith. Yay! Nailed it.
Mount Sunday is a 2.5-hour drive from Christchurch on reasonably good roads and sits on a combination of Department of Conservation Nature Reserve and private land owned by Mount Potts Sheep Station. A big hello to the folks at Mount Potts who we bumped into a few years back when we first visited on holiday. You can visit the filming locations on specific 4-wheel drive tours or simply park in the car park and hike the 20 minutes yourself up to the location as we're doing today.
So right here on the slope of the hill, you can actually see where they laid the foundation for the palisade and the outer wall, and I think maybe just up here we might actually have the gatehouse. Right about here would have been right underneath the archway. The path is sort of sloping up to this where Gandalf and the 3 hunters rode on in. What better spot to start crafting? So we've got over the first hurdle. Our pieces have arrived relatively intact. The 2 gatehouses are in good shape, a little bit of nicks here and there that we can fix pretty easily, but the gate itself is much more worse for wear as it just took off down the hill because it's made of balsa wood and this wind is pretty fierce. So first we're gonna start slapping that all together and get this structure locked down tight. Brilliant, just Edoras in the background. No big deal, no big deal.
Edoras is covered in a blend of tussock and super thorny gorse bush, and although they are spiky, the latter actually makes a reasonable windbreak. So Bo and I found a little spot just down from the gatehouse amongst what would have been the barrows of the Kings of the Mark and started tackling the first part of the build, reassembling the balsa structures and mounting them to the foam. This was done exclusively with weld-bond PVA and wooden skewers to give us long-term strength and a fast physical bond, essential in this wind. I started with the two gatehouses, and then once those were lined up, I pinned in place the rather fragile gate tower and then set about gluing in all the small details that I'd carefully removed, like the large and small ladders interconnecting the upper platforms, as well as some smaller broken wooden details which had been damaged in transit. The gorgeous landscape around us is protected by the Department of Conservation, so just like the films before us, it was vital that we did not let a single foreign element, a stray chunk of balsa, postage and packing materials, or even a single fibre of static grass escape into the landscape around us. So in between helping me film, my assistant Bo channeled his inner treebeard to protect that natural beauty.
It's very windy. Let's go find a new spot to do some paint work.
With the structures locked down, we moved up the slope to sit just under the rocky precipice that Meduseld and the upper city were built upon, and set about doing some light paint work with browns and bones to touch up all of the dodgy exposed balsa I'd created when I ripped the pieces apart. It was at this moment, perched on a weird little seat-shaped rock and looking out over the approach to Edoras that Gandalf and the Three Hunters traversed, that I was pretty blown away. It might only be for today, but this is a pretty amazing view from my office window. Meanwhile, Bo got to work on some Rohan-themed drawings for his stunning Instagram. If any of you folks don't know Bo, he's a wicked artist specializing in Middle-earth and Star Wars-themed iconography. His Insta is always linked down in the channel description, so go and give him a follow and buy some of his prints. We headed down into the barrows before the gates to nestle ourselves amongst the stunning tussock grass, which is so synonymous with Rohan landscapes, whether it's here at Edoras or in the rolling plains of central Otago, a spot we will be visiting plenty of times next year. Up first is the super easy to apply static grass tufts, mostly made from dead grass and spring grass blends, and are fantastic for location work because they are beautifully stable pieces that self-adhere to the board with no need for an applicator or messy glues. I built these up quite heavily across the board, especially all around the structures, to simulate the grass growing in regions where water would pool and foot traffic would be minimal.
So the tufts are down and looking fantastic, but the next couple of phases, the flock and the sprays and the aggregates, they're not something we can do out here in this beautiful location, this conservation department area. So we're going to take this back to the car and apply all of those in a nice, safe, secure environment.
Down in the back of the rental RAV4, deep into the boot and out of the wind, it was time to lay down the bulk of our ground covering. Maybe one day, if this channel format works out, and boy I hope it does because I just want to do this forever, we can build like a custom mobile studio / camper van to do all the messy work in that we can't do out on location, and we won't have to drive back and forth to the workshop at home. We'll have to think of some sort of badass name for it, maybe Shadowfax or Zorp Camper. Ooh, what about Battle Camper? Yeah, that sounds awesome.
That basically does make him a threat to me.
Get f***ing wrecked, New Zealand.
Who must be destroyed at all costs.
I built up a mix of static grass, foam flock of greens, browns and yellows, little spots of clump foliage for that kind of extra foliage element, and then grabbed a little bit of gravel from the road base that was used in the car park just to give it some rocks and gravel around the place, and then sealed that all down super tight with another coat of isopropyl alcohol and scenic sealant. Luckily, in the New Zealand sun coming in through the car window, this dried super fast, so it was soon rock solid and ready to head back out on location.
Everything's starting to dry and it's looking really good, but the wind has got fierce. Doesn't matter, we're still going to the top. It's time to go up to the Golden Hall of Meduseld. We've climbed all the way to the top. We are right now where the Golden Hall would have sat, right under Meduseld. It is an absolutely gorgeous vista, but this is the strongest wind I've ever experienced in my life. I'm literally leaning back into the wind right now. I'd say it's at least 100 kilometers an hour. I don't think we're going to be able to do a great deal of painting up here. This is without a doubt the most insane thing I've ever done for this YouTube channel. Bo and I are basically hiding here in the top of this little rocky escarpment right under Meduseld. I've got the board here, it's looking great. We're going to see if we can get a little bit painted. I might try and get some layers down on Aragorn. I've got 2 massive bags of paints. They've managed to survive the plane trip over, which is great, nothing's exploded. I was clearly very optimistic. I think I might use 3 paints before we quit this. And I've got 2 brushes. I've brought no paint water, so I guess we'll be licking our brushes clean in between colors. Got my whole Rohan army here as well. It's basically all painted. I've just got a few key details on some heroes left. A bit of work left to do on Aragorn's armor, just some nice kind of reds and greens and golds, and then he is going to be ready. Hell, the lid of my foam case just flew away. That is long gone.
After sprinting off down the hill to find the sheet of foam impaled on a very helpful gorse bush, we return to our sheltered nook to get down some paint, although it does make me wonder just how much film equipment was constantly trying to make escape attempts during principal photography. So as I got painting in this stunning landscape, it really did bring home the challenges that Dan Henner and Grant Major and their teams would have had bringing this location to the screen. The wind, the remote location, the limited access, the conservation land. It's utterly remarkable filming happened here at all.
You gotta do what you gotta do when you're at the top of a mountain. All right, brush is clean. I'm giving up on Aragorn. That is too hard in this wind. It's too fine detail.
Sadly, we looked up towards the Southern Alps behind the Helm's Deep filming location across the plain, and we saw a huge cloud front marking an oncoming storm. Apparently, Saruman wasn't done with conquering Rohan yet. So with Bo lying on the ground trying to hold Edoras to the hilltop, we grabbed some finished shots of the board, but it was too windy to display even the little shingle roof, let alone my army.
So that trip out to Edoras was exactly 2 years ago, to the day. Very spooky. And here in front of me is everything that survives from my first 3 Edoras builds that has made it here to New Zealand. And it's quite fitting because these 2 pieces are quite representative of where I want to go with the final, the ultimate Edoras mega build. Now, the gatehouse, this is the original piece from the first board, and it's going to form the centerpiece of one half of my Edoras mega build, which will be split into 2 boards. The lower half will be focused on basically what was built on the set out at Mount Sunday, the gatehouse, the lower city, and then I'll expand that to have a whole heap of houses and dwellings backing up against that rocky cliff, and then perch up on the rocky escarpment will be the ultimate Edoras board. The inner city, Meduseld, the royal stables, everything that we know so well from the movies, all of the things that they built on location will be built in the Zorpazorp Edoras megaboard. This 2-tiered monster board that joins together with the cliff in between. It's going to be absolutely massive. So many houses, huge meters and meters of palisade wall. It is going to be absolutely mega. But that is all of our journey for today. I hope you guys enjoyed that kind of historical look back on the journey so far for Edoras. It's actually been really helpful for me to kind of find the clarity of crafting vision to execute the next stage of the project. And if you're kind of worried that you didn't see any brand new crafting in this video, fear not, because there is a brand new crafting video coming out on this Friday, I think. This is actually kind of like a bonus video in addition to your normal weekly Zorpazorp programming. So I hope you guys enjoyed that one, although to be honest, as the original Edoras videos did so badly, all of this was probably new to you anyway. So, more Edoras on the way very soon. It's a great time for Rohan, and it's a great time for Middle-earth.
And don't forget to use my Raid Shadow Legends link in the description or scan my QR code to get insane bonuses for new players with an epic champion.